the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
We have Atlanta in the house once again today, representing. Welcome back to the show, everyone, where we explore how empathy, connection, and purpose transform business from the inside out. I'm Stephen, joined by my co-host, Tullio. According to a report by Catalyst, 76% of people who experienced empathy from their leaders reported they were engaged, compared to 32% who experienced less empathy. Empathy isn't just a human value, it's a business advantage. And we know right now, worldwide, only 21% of the population is engaged at work. This is terrible. Let's see what we can do to improve it, people. So today, we're diving into the role of empathy in leadership and why it's a foundational skill for high-performing cultures. Tullio, introduce our guest today.
Yes, that disengagement is absolutely the worldwide worst epidemic. So our guest today is Holly Golebiowski. She's the partner at LeaderSkills, where she works with mission-driven leaders to develop emotional intelligence, navigate conflict, and build high-trust teams. Holly brings a unique blend of nonprofit leadership, education, and deep facilitation to her approach. Holly, welcome to the show. We're excited to speak with you today.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So to start us off, tell us a little bit about LeaderSkills and what brought empathy to the center of your leadership journey.
Well, first of all, LeaderSkills, the easiest way that we describe ourselves is we are no bullshit leadership training. I hope I'm allowed to swear.
Yes.
But pretty much it is just a 3-month process where every 2 weeks you learn a new idea and you put it into practice right away. It is nothing. It's not high level ideas or base level, just like cross it off your list, too easy to really be a big deal. It's somewhere in the middle. And we have had great success, have 100% money back guarantee. Nobody's ever taken us up on it. And our participants have been very happy and have said it's something they'll use the rest of their life, not just personal or not just work, but personal as well. So that's in a nutshell, a little bit about LeaderSkills, but I think you'll get a better idea of it with my journey. Since you asked about that, I think it explains a lot and actually speaks to empathy very well. I was in my career, made the jump from on-site manager to regional manager, and I completely failed. If you think about the Peter principle, I got elevated to that role that I really didn't have the skill set to do, and I was about to be fired. I was the A+ kid my whole life. This was traumatizing. I was like, what? I can't believe I'm at the bottom of the list. That had never happened to me before. And I had heard through the grapevine, Holly, you might be getting canned. So I of course wanted to find a solution. So I ended up with an executive coach, Nan O'Connor, who created LeaderSkills. And we spent about 6 months, and I call myself Student Zero because everything her and I went through in that period of time was what we train on LeaderSkills now. And I went from being almost fired to at the top of my peer group and training other regional managers within a year. So it was a very long journey. I'm happy I was open to it and I learned a lot, but it all started with self-awareness and, empathy and understanding where people are and where you are. So I think it really fits well with this topic today.
Well, Holly, you can be an A+ student, but I know business schools and stuff, they aren't teaching empathy and
no.
So it's like, hey, I missed this class, right? What happened? Was I sick? But so I think leaders, they're taught to prioritize results and efficiency. But you've seen how empathy can actually enhance performance. What's the business case for empathy in leadership?
Well, I think the biggest one is turnover. I mean, if you are an empathetic leader and that's your culture, then you are going to have employees that stay longer and are happier while they're there. You won't see quiet quitting that you keep hearing about, it's the biggest thing I see is turnover dramatically goes down when your leaders are empathetic.
Yeah, I tell people, if there's a business problem that you have, just look up empathy, and related to that problem, there's probably some study now, that's backing it up as the best approach is taking this sort of empathetic approach, whatever that problem is. There seems like we've got pages and pages of stats that back up taking that kind of approach. So I'm glad we've got someone out there doing the good work in companies to help spread the word on this.
It's such a critical skill, and without it, the impact is traumatic. It's very negative, from burnout to toxic cultures. So we're curious. You work with a lot of leaders who are actually navigating burnout, conflict, even organizational change. What role does empathy play in helping those teams move through those complexities?
Well, it does a lot, but I would say a big thing is kind of what Stephen just said, is that sorry guys, I just totally lost my train of thought, but I know what I wanted to say, so let me back it up there. I think with empathy, it lets you see people as people, not objects. And what Stephen did say earlier is they don't train empathy. So as we go through our careers, we're taught how to do our job in terms of what you check off your list, right? Not this people piece of it. So we all end up in that world of burnout and conflict because we've never been really given the skill set to navigate that world, I think. So one thing that I would say Nan taught me to do early on is to read the book, Leadership and Self-Deception. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that one, but it's by the Arbinger Institute. And it's kind of a little hokey. It's, like a parody, but it is it just makes you think and see people differently and your team differently. And it really focuses on that they're people, not objects. So you're not trying to just get like transactions from them and a checklist. You're really seeing who they are and working with them to get things done. So I think that's a big thing, is a lot of us probably don't realize we're seeing our team as that object to accomplish a means, versus a person with feelings and their own goals and their own way of solving problems.
Well, we can't even call them human at work. It's got to be like human resources or human capital, right?
Yeah, human capital, yeah.
My favorites is assets.
We aren't even calling them humans. It's just like it's just treating them as objects all the time, even in the labels that we use in our language.
It seems the more digital we go, it seems we keep choosing efficiency over relationship. So it makes everyone feel like they're a cog in the wheel. It's that's typical of non-empathetic environments, which are somewhat pervasive, but there's still resistance to it. Like there's some companies that have resistance to it. Maybe we can talk about like what's one leadership myth that empathy helps dismantle. Let's talk about some of the key things, the benefit. What's one of the myths that it could dismantle, that it helps dismantle? Maybe we can convince some people who are on the fence about adopting empathy in their leadership.
I think a big way thing is like, to be a good leader, people don't need to be treated equally to make it a fair environment, or exactly the same to make it a fair environment. And I think a lot of people feel like that's how you need to be as a leader, and you can't make exceptions. So I would say that's a big one that plays into it. As a leader, you really need to understand your team and how different they each are and how they each solve problems, so that you can get to them what they need to do that job well. And it's not about me being the boss, just dictating the rules. Like, all right, here's everything that needs done. Here's how you're going to get it done. Go. You need to, as a leader, adjust to each employee very differently. You need to really think about who they are and what they need from you. So I guess that's kind of two things, but I would say those are two very big things that definitely make a big difference.
Yeah. Can you share a time when like empathy helped shift a difficult situation into a growth opportunity? I feel like a lot of leaders, that's where it gets stretched sometimes. I think your abilities to show empathy is when, some difficult situation arises. Any thoughts there?
Definitely. I think conflict is something that very few people know how to handle properly. And I think it does go back to empathy again, because you need to be self-aware enough to recognize there's a conflict and that it needs a solution versus just getting angry. Because how many times at work, I'm sure there's plenty of listeners that are like, yeah, I get mad all the time at work. Well, anytime you get mad, that means there's a conversation that you need to have. It means there's probably a misunderstanding, or maybe you're the problem and you haven't thought about that. So I think conflict and how you handle it ties into that. And for me personally, I was taught, again, through the LeaderSkills process, we use the nonviolent communication method. There's a book out there by Marshall Rosenberg. I believe I got that one right, where in that process, you actually share how you feel because of the problem. Like, hey, so-and-so, you were late to the meeting. You're always late. It seems like it's a reoccurring problem. I feel like I don't matter or I'm insignificant to you. And when they start hearing that, how it makes you feel, it is like mind blowing to a lot of people. I've had very few people respond by saying, I don't care, or most of them are like, oh my gosh, I did not mean to do that. I did not mean to make you feel that way. I'm very sorry. And that really puts them in a position of having empathy for what they're doing to you, putting, them in your shoes in effect. So I actually have, countless times this has happened for me in a work situation where it's definitely improved the situation and helped overcome it just by helping them through it as well. And also approaching the conflict in a healthy way.
We have this approach at work. That I always say, and we've repeated on this podcast a few times, is like, make connection a goal, right? Just make connection a goal. So you're going to come into that conversation with a little bit of a different approach when you're doing that way. And like you said, you'll be like, hey, I don't want to be disconnecting. This is how I felt, but you can go through that whole routine, like you said, but I really want to make sure we're on the same page. This is our goal, is make connection. It's not putting up walls and resistance, and it's definitely an empathetic approach. Tullio, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things that resonated. One, you talked about most cases, the anger, it's tied to a lack of self-awareness, which I think is also synonymous with acceptance. I think part of the problem is we want to see people how we perceive them that they should be versus who they are. So there's a lack of acceptance, which produces a mismatch in expectation. Like I'm mad because I expected you to be a certain way instead of accepting you the way you are and working with what you have, which is about connection, as Stephen mentioned. But the other thing that stood out to me is the nonviolent communication. That reminds me of these clearing exercises that I've seen. We have actually done that in our company as well, where it's like where you can express what the person did or what you perceive they did without judging them and say, this is how I felt, instead of saying how it made me feel. This is how I felt. Absolutely. And then they actually state, this is what I need from you, which is really about connection. Yes. And the other person's role is just to listen and take it in and not rebuttal. And it's intended to be present, because you could go into a meeting, if you've got something against someone, you're not present with them. You're like, absolutely. In your head.
You have preconceived notions. You're already making plenty of assumptions. And that's, exactly. I consider that one of the big sins. Yeah.
If you can't be present with each other, there's no connection. And that's why this idea of connection comes first, because then you will go out of your way to make sure, how do I remove this barrier that I'm feeling? It's about achieving connection, not correction, right? And that's such a key thing.
So here's the problem. I think 92% of CEOs think their organization's empathetic, but only 50% of those employees agree. So what systems or practices have you seen that work well to build empathy into a culture?
Well, I would say one of the first things that to me really makes a huge difference is the DISC profile. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it is, it's not a personality assessment. It's a behavioral response assessment. And it breaks people down into 4 categories of how they respond to challenges around them. And it spits out like this 30-page report. And I can't tell you how many times between LeaderSkills and coaching clients, people are like, this isn't me. And then within a few minutes, they'll be like, or a week, maybe not very much time will go by. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is me. I can't believe it. And it just prepares them with how people view you. But also you can look at other people's discs in your organization. Like we encourage people to have like a shared drive where everybody can get to them. So you can see how they want to be communicated with and they want to function. Some people, we are not the same. And just 4 categories, by the way, is a very broad stroke. Obviously, everyone doesn't fit perfectly into those. But I think once you understand how you're coming across to people and then can look at how they perceive themselves, it is just a night and day change. It's unreal, because people are always blown away the first time they look at that disc. And then once they use it to go have a hard conversation with someone, it makes their life so much easier, because now they are in that person's shoes. They can see how they're going to likely take it and how you need to say things to them to improve that process. So that would be my first one. I'm quite obsessed with the DISC. I think it's been the biggest game changer for me in my personal life, but also with clients. So it's been great.
Yeah,
but there's beyond that plenty of other assessments as well that are easy to pick.
I've talked to other CEOs and they're like, my DISC is blah, blah, blah. And they're just explained, their personality so that they know how for me to quickly understand how they operate. Which
it's
is
very eye-opening, the DISC, because one thing I loved is my natural state and then my adaptive state, like what I do to survive. And that was very eye-opening because my natural state's to be an influencer, to lead, to move forward. But then if in some cases to survive, I have to sort of diminish myself so that I don't threaten perhaps, someone who might be an egomaniac. It was very eye-opening. It's like, man, how many people don't live their true state because they're just afraid? And, if you create awareness around that, then everybody would be a little bit more respectful.
Well, I mean, Tullio, that key word there is like awareness, I think, is just the self-awareness for leaders. I always said this, we've said this a few times on the show, is your employees don't need to deal with your shit. Right? Work on yourself. And that starts with a bit of self-awareness process, So DISC is like, this is a great place to start from, so that you start that journey with a little more self-awareness, because that's where, if you want to build empathy in your business, start with yourself if you're a leader.
Exactly. Oh God, yeah. You will never be empathetic without self-awareness. It leads to it.
Leave your trauma out the door. We got a couple of audience questions. Let's start with one from Martha here on YouTube. Holly, what's the difference between controlling emotions and suppressing them, and why does that distinction matter? Great question.
Well, I think in suppressing them, you're just not dealing with them. You're ignoring them and moving on, and they're going to blow up at some point. And that's never good for anybody, but both personally and professionally. But I think controlling them is recognizing you're having an emotion and then thinking about it, taking a minute, pump the brakes and just say, okay, why am I having this emotion, and what can I do to solve it? Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's something you need to change. So you're actually taking action on the emotion versus just ignoring it. So I think that's the big difference there.
Yeah. And I think like with a meditation practice or something like that, you start to kind of step outside of yourself a little bit and see, you can recognize these emotions when they hit and be like, oh, why am I feeling this? Like you said, it's not suppressing it. It's understanding it's there. And then, going a little bit deeper with that. Tullio, you said we had another?
Yeah, we got another one. This is from LinkedIn. Any tips on how to give and receive feedback with emotional intelligence? Pretty broad question, but good question.
That is a very broad question. Yes. Well, I always revert back to the DISC, first of all, because I think that's definitely going to help you a lot. But I would say it is so important to always ask for feedback from everyone. Anytime you're doing things, whether it's once a month or once a week, depending on the person. But if you have a direct report, you should be having regular check-ins with them. You should always be, whether it's once a week, bi-weekly, whatever it is, so that anytime you need to have a hard conversation, they're already programmed in to know to talk to you and that you're going to have this conversation. And I think that you just have to be very genuine at all times. And that is always like the constant ask for the feedback is going to get you there, because let's be real. Nobody's going to give you the real feedback when you ask, especially if they're reporting to you. People above you, maybe, but they may not have the time or the energy to have really thought through it, or they have to schedule time to think through it to give you good feedback. So you have to get people in the habit and ask for it regularly, I think, to start getting to the good, true, honest feedback from people.
Yeah, I think it starts a lot of times, I think if you can just build a culture that is psychologically safe for people to be able to speak, what's on their mind. And, it's just a safe place where like, hey, I don't agree with what you just said here, and here's why, blah, blah. And you're like all working in the same direction for the same goal. And it's all understood that anyone can speak their mind. Otherwise, if it's not there, then the feedback's not there. Right.
Yeah.
This is where I think practicing vulnerability is such a powerful thing for a leader, because even just saying, hey, I messed up and I need some help fixing it. I'm kind of not there. I'm not getting it. that level of vulnerability just opens people up to want to actually support you and give you feedback. And then you create that safety where you can then ask for real feedback and people will give it to you. But it is up to the leader to be able to create that, and have that vulnerability.
And I guarantee, Tullio, when you just said that, there's a bunch of people out there who are going, "Oh, hell no, I'm not gonna."
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, it's like a lot of leaders, like they'll feel like, okay, empathy is just another one of those more things I have to focus on because their plate is already full. And so, like in your practice as a coach, how do you help them integrate it without sacrificing outcome? That's the other belief sometimes is if I practice, I push the organization forward and then we're going to fail, right? So, which is, it's not true, but how do you help them through that? What's worked for you?
Empathy is going to increase the outcome. It's going to increase results, but it does take time and practice and self-awareness. So anytime someone's like overloaded with too many different things, that's why we only do a new course every 2 weeks in LeaderSkills, because there's a million books you could read and a million concepts you could implement, but you can't do it all at once. But empathy, I think, is just, you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So if you have to print a sign off to put above your monitor, put a reminder on the dash of your car, just to get yourself in the habit, that visual reminder sometimes helps people a lot. But, something else too, that I think ties back a little bit to what we were just talking about is you have to give people time to respond to things. I think that if you're asking people questions or looking for feedback or trying to be more empathetic, you can't expect a response right away from some people. So, I think that a culture of, hey, I need this, or I'm going to ask you this question, or I'm going to give you this feedback. You have to be allowed to let that person say, can I get back to you? I want to chew on this, or, let me go blend, whatever their word is. But I think that is very critical too. And making sure you can develop empathy, not only for yourself, but also with your team.
Let me go type in what I really want to say in ChatGPT and then ask it to tell it to you in a way that's empathetic.
Hey, a lot more people should do that.
Yes. Go vent to ChatGPT and then have it regurgitated in a way that sounds like nice and kind and professional.
It's that pause before you finish sending the send or whatever on your rant email. Now go run that through ChatGPT real quick, people, and say, make this kinder, please.
There is also that disc profile type that doesn't ever like to respond to anything quickly either. There's just those personality types out there. There's, some people are so obsessed with being perfectionists, which is not bad. We need those people, right? But they need that time. So it's a matter of letting them just go sit on it to make sure they like their answer too before they say it. So it's interesting.
I like the idea you mentioned of like having a note or something like a reminder. Are there other little simple practices that people or teams can start doing that can, right now that can kind of help foster that empathy?
I think you need to be mindful about it and scheduling time for yourself. If you're trying to learn anything new or trying to implement anything new, you can't just say, I'm going to do it and then go about your day. You have to be very mindful. And I initially had to calendar time once a week for myself when I started on my journey with NAN, because my whole issue was self-awareness and empathy. I just was so unaware. I'm like, why doesn't anybody know I care so much? I care, and here I was just being an evil boss, overly aggressive from their vantage point. So I think that if you are trying to improve and go down this road, you definitely need to do some kind of calendared time where you really are just sitting and thinking through it strategically. Have I done it? What have I done? What could I do better? How am I going to focus better this upcoming week or month, whatever your schedule is? So I think that's a big piece of it as well.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, totally. Holly, one of the things we talk about a lot is the role of purpose, both personal purpose and purpose in business, and how it can become a North Star in shaping every decision we make and how we go about leading as well. In fact, according to PwC, 79% of business leaders say purpose is central to their success. Yet, only 34% say it guides decision-making. So there's a bit of a disconnect on the value of it and then how it drives decisions. What's the deeper purpose that drives your work at LeaderSkill? If you can share that with us, and how do you instill that desire for the people, the leaders that you do coach?
Well, for me, it all goes back to that period where I almost got fired, and that hopelessness and, oh my gosh, maybe I can't do this job, or maybe I'm not right for it. Like that was just, it was a horrible, terrifying, stressful, miserable place. And someone helped me out of that. So for me, that's what drives me. And my purpose is being able to help people with that, help people through that, and help them see the light in effect in a way that Nan did with me. So I would say that 100% is how and why I do what I do.
Yeah, I that's the one thing we kind of often gravitate to when helping companies figure out, hey, what's your highest purpose? It's how you really in service to others in some way. And so you've obviously been through this experience and you're like, oh, it's been so great for me. I really need to help other people, you know, in that same position. So how do you help leaders move from talking about values to actually operationalizing them in their culture and behavior? Yeah, you mentioned like you're doing like little 2-week sort of sessions, not giving them too much, but you're talking 90 days to kind of help operationalize some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, this is a bit of a pet peeve for me with companies over the years, where they're like, what do we want our values to be? And they write down what they want to be, not what they are. So they start with a frame of reference that, oh, here's our values, here's who we are now, but they never were that to begin with. So how can they expect to be that? So I think a big part of it is acknowledging, who are we today? What do we want to be? And how do we get there? And creating actionable things that you can do to get there. You know, like you can't just say you're compassionate, or, I mean, I worked for a company where they always said, do the right thing, but they never, I don't know how many times in a day I'm like, that's not the right thing to do. Like, you know, like you can't say we do the right thing and then not do the right thing. So I definitely speak a lot about that. And I actually have, you know, had conversations where don't just throw values on the wall or your mission statement if you aren't sure of what it is. Like, pump the brakes, think about it for a minute. Don't just do it to have it. If it takes you 6 months, if it takes you a year to really determine what your culture is going to be and get there before you put it on the wall, that's going to be so much better. Because you know what makes people crazy is when you work for a company who claims to be something and they're not that, because they've already lost you. I mean, you're already
you're already disconnected right there. It's like, okay, I thought this was this way and it's not. Like for us, this is where we get into the Bliss, build, love, and scalable systems. Is we know we're not going to get there, or we knew we're not going to get there overnight to build this sort of loving culture. But as repeatedly asking that question, how can we build something loving, empathetic, compassionate into some sort of system that we do at work? And it was like little by little, we're just adding these things. And then over time, little by little, a little makes a lot. And so suddenly now you are walking that walk, right? You are authentically doing it. But it's not going to happen overnight. And like you said, it's not just, you know, you put up the poster on the wall or whatever. Yeah. That's total lip service, is nothing. It's like that poster on the wall. You need to audit your business by every part of that, and repeatedly audit your business. Great way to put it. Yeah, by every part of that, because that's how you're going to start living it. Unless it's otherwise, it's going to just stay there. And like you said, you're going to have people disconnected from you know, that job interview to now like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was at all.
Yeah, that's not what the wall said when I came in for my interview.
No, exactly. And also it goes back to self-awareness and acceptance, because if you're doing values based on aspirational truth, then you're not accepting reality. You're just kind of living in a fantasy world of what could be. Now, you could say this is what we aspire to, but we should have a plan to get there. Most companies don't. They just put these aspirational goals and then want everybody to live up to them without checking in whether they align. You know, it's one of the reasons we ourselves define them all as a company collectively. You know, everyone's personal values and purpose was stated as their own. And then we amalgamated all those results, which bubbled up the company's purpose and values, which became something that didn't need to be sold to anyone because it was designed by all the employees, you know. But a lot of companies feel like, oh, that's too much work to do that, you know. So it's a question of accountability, right? Can we get things done, and can we get them done quickly enough? And so, in your experience, what have you seen in terms of empathy and accountability, in terms of them coexisting in high-performing organization. Is it a hoax to think that they cannot coexist? What's been your experience? And if you have some use case or an example where that proved to be the total opposite, where they actually created better performance, please share that with us.
Yeah, well, a little bit about what you just said. I think that you guys really need to congratulate yourselves, because it's very rare that I have companies that have actually talked to all of their team to say, who are we? That's one of the biggest things I always say. Don't ask leadership what the company's culture is, because leadership never gets the real feedback. I mean, they're the boss. We're all looking at them with these big eyes like, oh God, I'm not going to tell them what I really think, so you kind of, give them lip service to what they want to hear, because they don't necessarily really want to hear what you have to say, even if they don't know that that's what they're doing. So you guys doing that is huge, because it keeps you from drinking your own Kool-Aid when you start at the bottom and ask everyone that question. So that is huge and so important and critical. Every company should do that. And pretty much anyone at top shouldn't say what your values are, because you're not the ones that really know. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I loved going through that exercise too, just because there were some personal purposes or higher purposes of people that I didn't know they were passionate about. We've got 40 plus people in our agency, but it's just like, oh, there's like a few in here like, oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting, right? And it just showed each other. I think everyone else probably felt that same way about seeing someone else in there too. Like, oh, I didn't know that particular person as well as I thought I did.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very helpful to connect you with them. And something else too, just popped in my head, kind of ties to that, is I think so many times companies want to treat errors or mistakes or problems almost like a punitive process. I think if you treat things like a growth process, it's a distinction that's very important. If as a leader in your company, you look at any problem that comes up as an opportunity to have a conversation to grow that person, not about, oh, you did something wrong. It's, oh, I'm going to make you better for yourself and the company. And let's talk about how to do that. And if people don't feel like they're in like a punitive process constantly, they're going to be better. And you're treating them with a lot more empathy, because you're trying to figure out what's going on to help make them better, versus just don't do that again and slap them on the hand.
Yeah, no, so I've always said, and maybe it sounds a little radical, but it's like, any problem at my company is my fault. Like, it's my fault personally. I hope other people feel that way too, but it's my fault because I didn't have them prepared for, the situation, or we didn't have a system in place to protect against this, or we didn't, do this. So, but it's starting from a place of like, okay, we're all in this together. And, this is clearly some shortcoming that I didn't see, coming, that was going to happen, usually. And if it's something, it's like, okay, maybe I wasn't quite clear. How can we be better at being clear about this one type of issue that we may have had or not? But it's always starting with like, I need to improve myself or our systems in some way, not like, very disconnecting, accusatory, and like you said, slap on the hand kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you know what happens when you have a leader that thinks that way? And if you move into a decentralized, autonomous, more self-managed kind of an environment like we are, you can codify that across the organization. Then everyone actually lives with that credo. I'm responsible for fixing the things I can actually impact the things I'm seeing that need to be changed. So it's not only taking responsibility, but it's also being proactive to be the solution. And that's a huge shift, but it all starts with that mindset. That consciousness has to start somewhere. And if it's not at the leadership level, it just doesn't permeate everywhere else. It's critically important. It's one of the reasons we're being successful in that direction, is because Stephen has always had that consciousness, not always easily found that's why most organizations is like, could we go self-management? Really depends on the leader.
Yeah.
How involved they are, because if they're not there and they're still insecure, it's going to be really difficult. But magic happens when you do it right.
Holly, what legacy do you hope to leave through your work?
Biggest thing for me is that I leave people better than I found them. I mean, and this is not just in my work, it's in my personal too. see someone not happy or not smiling, I try to give them some kind of genuine compliment. I don't make one up. Or, if I come across someone that's struggling, and even if it's not something I'm getting paid to do, I will take the time to, help people. I get a lot out of that, and it's very rewarding. So I guess it's a little selfish because I feel better for doing it. But in reality, I've really had that urge to want to make sure, no matter who I come across, whether it's clients, people in LeaderSkills, any of the people I come across on a day-to-day basis, that I'm always leaving them better than I found them.
So a question we ask everyone on the show is, what role does love play in business?
I think love plays it's everything. Why do we work? Why do we have a job? Because of, probably the family we love, or because of a love of something that we want to go do. But I think, even in loving yourself, if you don't care for yourself, you're not going to care for your employees. So I think you have to love yourself in that respect too. So I think it has everything to do with it, is my short answer.
That was short, but I love that so much. It was like, no, it was very like, I can already see the quote on that whole thing, but
I heard that song in my head. What's love got to do? Everything's got to do with it. I love it. I love it.
No, it has to do with everything. And I do like the focus on, especially, because you're focused on leadership. It's like, love of yourself too is part of this.
Oh, it's critical. If you do not take care of yourself and love yourself, you will never be a great leader. And you're not going to care for anyone else around you the way you need to. So I think it's very important. It's
so true. Every major stream of spirituality or religion all have that saying, love your neighbor as yourself. But there's always a focus on the neighbor. But the key to that was always yourself. You can't give what you don't have. So
absolutely.
You have to learn to love yourself. And that requires incredible self-awareness. In many cases, it requires healing yourself, because you're going to bring that stuff into your work. Like we talked about earlier, leave the trauma at the door. That only happens if you love yourself enough. So it's so important to do that. And if you can't do it on your own, get a coach. That's the whole point. So speaking of getting a coach, it's been great to have you on the show. How can people reach out to you, connect with you? Please give us all the ways we can do that.
The easiest way for LeaderSkills is going to our website, which is just leaderskills.training. Nothing after that. Training is the domain. And there's actually even free tips you can sign up for that come out every 2 weeks that Nan herself have crafted. They go on for a long time and they're amazing. So I highly recommend that if you'd like some more tips. But that's the best way. And for my coaching practice, I am just Holly G. Coaching at hollygcoaching.com. Very simple. Since no one can say my last name, it makes it very easy.
Well, Holly, thank you for coming onto the show, and to our listeners, thank you for tuning today. And today, if our episode gave you something to reflect on in your own leadership, please also share it with a colleague. Until next time, we'll see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.